What happens when Hollywood royalty meets political commentary's most unforgiving host? You won't believe what unfolds when Meghan Markle sits down with Bill Maher for what was supposed to be a simple promotional appearance. Last night's episode of Real Time turned into an absolute powder keg of accusations, royal secrets, and explosive revelations that left viewers stunned and one guest storming off set. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe what unfolds. The tension was palpable from the moment Meghan Markle walked onto the Real Time set, dressed in an elegant cream blazer that seemed to glow under the studio lights. She carried herself with the practiced poise of someone who had spent years navigating the treacherous waters of both Hollywood and Buckingham Palace. But even her polished exterior couldn't mask the slight tightness around her eyes as she settled into the guest chair across from Bill Maher, who was already wearing his trademark smirk that promised trouble ahead. Welcome back to Real Time. I'm Bill Maher, and tonight we have with us Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, actress, podcaster, and, according to some tabloids, the woman who single-handedly brought down the British monarchy. Maher opened with his characteristic blend of humor and provocation. The studio audience laughed nervously, but Meghan's smile remained frozen in place, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Thank you for having me, Bill," Meghan replied, her voice steady but carrying an underlying edge. "Though I have to say, that's quite an introduction. I'm here to talk about my new Netflix project and some exciting philanthropic work Harry and I are doing." Maher leaned back in his chair, clearly not interested in playing it safe. "Right, the Netflix deal. $40 million to produce content about, what was it, uplifting and entertaining stories. That's a lot of money for someone who spent most of her acting career doing cable, TV, legal dramas, and briefcase modeling." The comment hit its mark. Meghan's composure flickered for just a moment, her jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "I think you're underselling my body of work, Bill. 7 seasons on Suits, humanitarian work with the United Nations, advocacy for women's rights globally. But I suppose reducing women to their past roles is nothing new in this industry." "Oh, come on," Maher shot back, his voice rising slightly. "I'm not reducing you to anything. I'm questioning how someone goes from being a working actress to commanding tens of millions from streaming giants. What's the unique perspective you bring? What's the special sauce that makes Meghan Markle content worth more than established filmmakers who've been grinding for decades?" The audience was dead silent now, sensing the interview was veering into dangerous territory much earlier than anyone expected. Meghan straightened in her chair, her media training kicking in as she attempted to regain control of the narrative. "The special sauce, as you put it, is authenticity. It's bringing stories to light that haven't been told before. Stories about resilience, about finding your voice when powerful institutions try to silence you. Stories that matter to people who feel unheard." Maher's eyebrows shot up. "Powerful institutions trying to silence you? Are we talking about the British royal family here? Because last I checked, you and Harry have given more interviews in the past 3 years than most A-list celebrities give in a decade. Oprah, Netflix, your podcast, multiple magazine covers. If that's being silenced, sign me up for that kind of quiet treatment. That's exactly the kind of dismissive attitude that perpetuates harmful narratives." Meghan fired back, her composure beginning to crack. "When women, especially women of color, speak their truth about systemic issues and institutional racism, they're accused of being attention-seeking or manipulative. It's a classic silencing tactic." Hold on, Maher interrupted, holding up his hands. "Nobody's dismissing racism. That's real, that's serious, and it needs to be called out. But there's a difference between speaking truth to power and monetizing victimhood. You've built an entire brand around being wronged by the royal family while simultaneously capitalizing on your royal connections." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Meghan's face flushed slightly, and for the first time since sitting down, her carefully constructed media persona began to show cracks. "Monetizing victimhood? That's incredibly offensive, Bill. We're talking about real trauma, real harm that was done to me and my family." "I'm sure it was traumatic," Maher continued, seemingly unaware or unconcerned about pushing boundaries. But help me understand something. You knew what you were signing up for when you married into the royal family. You had to know there would be protocol, scrutiny, limitations on your freedom. Did you really think you could just waltz in and change a 1,000-year-old institution in a couple of years? Meghan's response was swift and sharp. So you're saying I should have just accepted racism and institutional bullying because it's tradition? That I should have smiled and stayed quiet while my mental health deteriorated and my safety was compromised? I'm saying maybe you should have done your homework before you signed up for the job, Maher replied without missing a beat. It's like complaining about the weather after you moved to Alaska. The royal family isn't exactly known for their progressive values or their warm, fuzzy family dynamics. They're a centuries-old institution built on tradition, hierarchy, and frankly, a fair amount of dysfunction. The tension in the studio was now thick enough to cut with a knife. Camera operators adjusted their positions to capture every micro-expression, every gesture that might signal the next verbal blow. Meghan's breathing had become slightly more pronounced, her media training warring with her obvious desire to defend herself more forcefully. That's an incredibly simplistic way to view it, she said, her voice taking on a harder edge. You're essentially victim-blaming, saying that because I married into an institution, I somehow deserve to be treated poorly, or that I should have expected it. That's the same logic used to justify all kinds of systemic abuse. Maher leaned forward, clearly energized by the confrontation. I'm not victim-blaming. I'm asking legitimate questions about choices and consequences. You had a successful acting career, financial independence, the freedom to speak out on causes you cared about. You gave that up to marry a prince, knowing full well what that institution represented. And now you're surprised that it didn't work out the way you hoped. The way I hoped? Meghan's voice rose for the first time, causing several audience members to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Bill, we're talking about death threats against my unborn child. We're talking about deliberate lies being spread in the press while the palace refused to correct them. We're talking about being cut off financially and losing security protection for our family. This isn't about hurt feelings or disappointed expectations. The confrontation was reaching a boiling point, and everyone in the studio could feel it. But what came next would push the situation beyond the point of no return, setting the stage for a clash that would leave both host and guest forever changed by their explosive encounter. Maher paused for a moment, studying Meghan's increasingly agitated state with the calculating gaze of a predator who had found his prey's weakness. When he spoke again, his voice carried a deliberately casual tone that made his words even more devastating. You know what I find interesting, Meghan? You talk about death threats and security concerns, but you and Harry seemed perfectly comfortable doing that Netflix documentary, that Oprah interview, your podcast. You've shared intimate details about private family conversations, released text messages, talked about private medical information. For people so concerned about privacy and security, you sure do put a lot of personal information out there for public consumption. The accusation hit Meghan like a physical blow. Her composed facade finally began to crumble as she gripped the arms of her chair. Those were our stories to tell, Bill. When an institution refuses to protect you, when they're actively working against you, sometimes the only way to defend yourself is to tell your truth publicly. Your truth, Maher repeated, emphasizing the words with air quotes. See, that phrase drives me crazy. There's not your truth and my truth and their truth. There's just the truth. And the truth is, you've made millions of dollars sharing private family drama while simultaneously complaining about privacy violations. You can't have it both ways. That's not what happened, Meghan shot back, her voice now clearly strained. We tried to handle things privately for years. We asked for help. We asked for protection. We asked for basic human decency. When that failed, when we were being destroyed in the press while the palace stood by and watched, we had no choice but to speak out. Maher leaned back, a satisfied smirk playing across his face. No choice? Come on, Meghan. You always had choices. You could have stayed in Canada. You could have returned to acting. You could have lived a quiet life away from the spotlight. Instead, you chose to wage a very public war against one of the world's most beloved institutions. And now you're upset that some people think you might have ulterior motives? The studio audience was completely silent now, watching this verbal bloodbath unfold with the horrified fascination of spectators at a car crash. Production assistants exchanged worried glances, unsure whether to intervene or let the carnage continue. The cameraman zoomed in closer, capturing every flicker of emotion across both participants' faces. Meghan's breathing was now visibly labored, her chest rising and falling as she struggled to maintain some semblance of control. Ulterior motives? Bill, I gave up everything. My career, my independence, my ability to speak freely about causes I cared about. I moved to a foreign country, learned their customs, tried to fit into their world. And in return, I was subjected to a campaign of hatred and racism that drove me to contemplate suicide. And I'm sorry that happened to you, Maher replied, though his tone suggested anything but sympathy. Mental health struggles are real and serious. But you know what else is real? The fact that you've turned that struggle into content. Your suffering has become your brand. Every interview, every documentary, every podcast episode comes back to how badly you were treated. At what point does sharing your trauma become exploiting your trauma? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Meghan's face went through a series of expressions: shock, hurt, and finally, a cold fury that transformed her entire demeanor. When she spoke, her voice was dangerously quiet. How dare you suggest that I'm exploiting my own trauma? Do you have any idea what it's like to be told by someone you trusted that your child wouldn't receive security protection because of the color of their skin? Do you know what it's like to have your own family turn against you and watch as the press destroys your reputation with lie after lie? I don't, Maher admitted, but I do know what it's like to watch someone turn personal grievances into a multi-million-dollar media empire. You and Harry have deals with Netflix, Spotify, book publishers, speaking engagements. You've monetized your royal exit better than most people monetize their actual careers. Meghan was now visibly shaking, her carefully applied makeup beginning to show stress lines around her eyes. We have to support ourselves somehow, Bill. We were cut off financially, remember? We have security costs, staff, charitable obligations. We're not living off trust funds like some people seem to think. Cut off financially, Maher repeated with obvious skepticism. Prince Charles was giving you guys millions per year in allowances. Harry inherited millions from his mother. You're not exactly starting from poverty here. Most people would consider being cut off from royal funding while still having millions in the bank a pretty good problem to have. It's not about the money, Meghan snapped, her composure finally breaking completely. It's about being abandoned by people who were supposed to protect you. It's about watching your husband's family choose their reputation over your safety. It's about being scapegoated for problems that existed long before I came along. Maher sensed blood in the water and pressed his advantage. Scapegoated? Or held accountable? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you walked into a family with centuries of established protocols and expected them to change everything to accommodate your preferences. When they didn't, you took your ball and went home, but not before making sure everyone knew how badly you'd been treated. The words hit their target with surgical precision. Meghan's face flushed crimson, and for a moment, it looked like she might physically lunge across the space between them. Instead, she sat forward in her chair, her voice rising to a level that made the studio microphones crackle with feedback. My preferences? My preferences were to not be subjected to racist attacks in the press while the palace remained silent. My preferences were to have my child protected from threats. My preferences were to be treated with basic human dignity. If that's too much to ask from the royal family, then maybe the problem isn't with me. Maybe it isn't, Maher conceded with false reasonableness. But maybe the problem is that you thought marrying into the royal family would be like playing a princess in a Disney movie, instead of joining an institution with real political and cultural responsibilities. Maybe you thought your Hollywood background would translate to royal duties, and when it didn't, you decided the whole system was broken. The accusation was the final straw. Meghan shot to her feet so quickly that her chair rolled backward, hitting the backdrop with a loud thud that echoed through the suddenly silent studio. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. And when she spoke, her voice carried a level of rage that no amount of media training could contain. "You have absolutely no idea what you're talking about," she said, her words coming out in a rush of fury and pain. "You sit here in your comfortable studio, making jokes about other people's trauma, and you think that gives you the right to judge decisions you could never understand. You want to know what really happened? What really broke me?" The studio held its collective breath as Meghan stood there, trembling with emotion, clearly on the verge of revealing something that would change everything. But what she said next would cross a line that neither she nor Maher could ever uncross. "You want the truth, Bill? The real truth?" Meghan's voice cracked with barely contained fury as she leaned forward, her eyes blazing. "They didn't just refuse to protect my son from racist threats. They actively participated in them. There were members of that family who made jokes about how dark Archie's skin might be. There were palace staff who leaked private information about my mental health struggles to tabloids for money. And when I begged for help, when I literally told them I was having suicidal thoughts, do you know what they said?" The studio was dead silent, even the camera operators frozen in place. Maher, for once in his career, seemed genuinely speechless, his usual smirk replaced by something approaching shock. But Meghan wasn't finished. "They told me it wouldn't be good for the institution if I sought professional help. They said my mental health was less important than protecting their image. So forgive me if I don't feel guilty about telling our story after they threw us to the wolves and then acted surprised when we fought back." The revelation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Even Maher, who had spent decades skewering public figures, seemed taken aback by the raw pain and fury in Meghan's voice. But instead of backing down or offering sympathy, he doubled down with the ruthless instinct of a seasoned provocateur. "That's a hell of an accusation, Meghan," he said slowly, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "You're essentially claiming that the royal family is not just racist, but actively malicious, that they deliberately sabotaged your mental health and put your family at risk. Those are pretty serious charges to level against people who can't exactly come on TV and defend themselves." "Can't defend themselves?" Meghan let out a bitter laugh that contained no humor whatsoever. "They have an entire media apparatus at their disposal. They have palace communications teams, friendly journalists, established relationships with every major news outlet in Britain. They've been defending themselves quite effectively, thank you very much, usually by throwing me under the bus." Maher leaned forward, sensing an opportunity to land a devastating blow. "Or maybe, just maybe, they're not defending themselves because what you're describing never actually happened the way you remember it. Maybe the pressure of royal life, the media scrutiny, the culture shock of moving to a different country affected your perception of events. Maybe what you interpreted as racism and malice was actually just the normal dysfunction of a centuries-old institution trying to navigate modern expectations." The suggestion that she might have imagined or misremembered the racist treatment sent Meghan into a complete emotional tailspin. Her face contorted with a mixture of rage and disbelief as she pointed an accusatory finger directly at Maher. "Are you seriously suggesting that I made up being subjected to racist abuse? That I imagined death threats against my child? That I fabricated concerns about skin color?" Her voice rose to nearly a shout, causing the studio microphones to distort with feedback. "This is exactly the kind of gaslighting that drove me to the breaking point in the first place." "I'm not gaslighting anyone," Maher shot back, his own voice rising to match her intensity. "I'm asking reasonable questions about extraordinary claims. You've painted yourself as the victim of a coordinated campaign by one of the world's most scrutinized families, but the only evidence we have is your word against theirs. And frankly, you have a pretty significant financial incentive to make this story as dramatic as possible." The accusation that she was lying for money was the final breaking point. Meghan's composure, already hanging by a thread, snapped completely. She began pacing behind her chair like a caged animal, her hands gesticulating wildly as words poured out of her in an uncontrolled torrent. "Financial incentive? You think I wanted any of this? You think I dreamed of having my reputation destroyed, my family torn apart, my mental health shattered? You think I wanted to spend years in therapy trying to undo the damage that institution did to me? You think I wanted my children to grow up knowing that their own family rejected them? I think you wanted to be a global celebrity, Maher replied with brutal honesty. And when the royal family didn't give you the platform you expected, you found another way to get it. You turned your personal grievances into a multimedia empire, and now you're upset that people are questioning your motives. The words hit Meghan like physical blows. She stopped pacing and turned to face Maher directly, her chest heaving with emotion. When she spoke, her voice was deadly quiet, filled with a cold fury that was somehow more intimidating than her earlier shouting. You know what, Bill? You're just like them. Just like every other privileged white man who thinks they can dismiss a woman's experience because it's inconvenient for your worldview. You've decided I'm lying. You've decided I'm manipulative. You've decided I'm the problem. All because it's easier than acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, one of your precious institutions is actually corrupt and racist. Maher's face flushed red at the accusation. Don't you dare play the race card with me, he snapped. I've spent my entire career calling out racism and injustice. But I've also spent my career calling out people who exploit real issues for personal gain. And right now, I'm looking at someone who has turned their personal drama into a $100 million brand while wrapped in the flag of social justice. Personal drama? Meghan's voice cracked with disbelief. My son receiving death threats is personal drama? Being told he wouldn't receive security because of his race is personal drama? Being driven to contemplate suicide by a coordinated harassment campaign is personal drama? It's personal drama when you turn it into content, Maher exploded, finally losing his own composure. When every interview becomes about your suffering, when every project becomes about your victimhood, when every public appearance becomes an opportunity to relitigate your grievances against the royal family. You've made your trauma into your brand, and now you're angry that people are noticing the pattern. The brutal assessment was too much for Meghan to bear. Tears began streaming down her face, cutting tracks through her makeup as years of suppressed pain and frustration poured out. But instead of breaking her spirit, the tears seemed to fuel her rage even further. You want to know what the real pattern is, Bill? She said through her sobs. The pattern is that every time a woman of color tries to speak truth to power, men like you find ways to discredit her. Every time we share our experiences, we're told we're lying, or exaggerating, or exploiting our own pain. You can't imagine that maybe, just maybe, we're telling the truth because acknowledging that truth would force you to confront your own complicity in these systems. Maher stood up from his desk, his own emotions finally getting the better of him. Complicity? Lady, I've done more to expose institutional racism and corruption than you ever will. But I draw the line at enabling people who weaponize their victim status for profit. And that's exactly what you've done. The studio erupted in chaos as both host and guest faced off like two prize-fighters in the final round of a brutal match. Production assistants frantically gestured from the sidelines, trying to signal for a commercial break, but both participants were too far gone to notice or care. Meghan wiped the tears from her face with the back of her hand, smearing her makeup but somehow looking more powerful in her disheveled state than she had in her polished arrival. You know what, Bill? This conversation perfectly illustrates why Harry and I had to leave. This is exactly the kind of hostile, dismissive treatment we faced every single day. The difference is, now I don't have to sit here and take it. She began gathering her purse and jacket with shaking hands, her movements sharp and decisive. I came here tonight hoping to have a meaningful conversation about important issues. Instead, I've been subjected to the same kind of character assassination that drove me out of Britain in the first place. Maher, still standing behind his desk, wasn't finished. Oh, spare me the dramatic exit. You came here to promote your projects and control the narrative, just like you do in every other interview. When someone finally asks you hard questions instead of lobbing softballs, suddenly you're the victim again. Meghan stopped in her tracks and turned back to face him one final time, her eyes blazing with an intensity that made even the veteran host take a step back. Hard questions? You didn't ask me hard questions, Bill. You ambushed me with personal attacks and conspiracy theories. You questioned my mental health, my motives, my integrity, and my experiences with racism. That's not journalism. That's character assassination. It's accountability, Maher shot back. Something you've been avoiding for years while you cash checks and play the victim. The final insult was too much. Meghan straightened to her full height, dignity returning to her posture despite her emotional state. Goodbye, Bill. Enjoy your ratings boost. I hope it was worth your integrity. She turned and walked toward the exit, with her head held high, ignoring Maher's final parting shot. The truth always comes out eventually, Meghan. Always. As the studio doors closed behind her with a resounding thud, the audience sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Maher remained standing behind his desk for a long moment, his chest heaving, before finally addressing the cameras with uncharacteristic uncertainty in his voice. Well, folks, that's something you don't see every day. We'll be right back after this break. As the cameras cut away and the show went to commercial, the magnitude of what had just transpired began to sink in for everyone involved. What started as a standard celebrity interview had devolved into one of the most explosive confrontations in late-night television history, leaving both participants forever changed by their brutal encounter.